That's some Southern hospitality.
Yeah, that is amazing.
Welcome to Atlanta.
Yeah, you know, the first day that I landed in the US, I landed in Atlanta. This was in 1994.
Really?
I was actually, I just gotten into Clemson. Go Tigers!
Oh.
Yes.
Is that Georgia Bulldogs?
Sorry, but neighboring state, and I landed here in Atlanta. So Atlanta always has like this real meaning for me.
It's great.
Nice to be back.
Well, we're excited to have you. As Billy mentioned, this is our third Southbound. Every year seems to get bigger and better. I think we have 2x or 3x every single year. And so I can't think of a better way for us to get started than to talk about what's on the mind of every go-to-market leader probably in this room. Is a word AI? Are you familiar with this?
Oh my God, yes. Oh. We're going to get into it. But...
Yeah, we're going to get into it, and I can't think of somebody better to talk to than you. You're something that I deeply respect and admire, but also you have a pulse of the market, so I think it's going to be a really fun conversation.
Yeah.
Let's dive in. So when we think about AI, it's hard to believe we're 3.5 years into this journey. There's been a lot of change. There's been a lot of hype. From your perspective, where are we at in this journey of AI?
Yeah, 3.5 years, does it feel like? It feels like every day we're running to catch up on what AI can do, should do, how should we as leaders, operate in this. And it's just been this one massive race that the speed only increases, it does not decline. So, I have a few slides and I just used it as a prop to kind of share some of the thoughts. And so I'll say, first off, 3.5 years, it is a platform shift. And platform shifts basically have a pattern, right? Every 15 to 20 years, we've had a platform shift.
Yep.
PC was a platform shift. Internet was a platform shift. Mobile, smartphones, platform shift. Social,
yep.
Now generative AI. And every one of these platform shifts, they carry a pattern to it, which is a new technology emerges. Right now, it is generative AI, the ability to for AI to generate insights and now even reason. And then the next thing that happens is that people start building towards it, sometimes overbuilding. I think we're kind of in that spot of overbuilding right now. And then, you begin to see what the value is of the new technology, and winners and losers of that new technology emerges. This is literally the pattern. And you can apply it to internet. When internet came, it was more about how do you get information, across any place that you're in? How can you search that information? That was what happened. People had to build capacity, fiber, routing, switching, all of the local area, wide area, all the networks got built in the early 2000s for this new technology. There was a new leader, the technology, anybody who controlled search became super powerful. They were the gatekeepers of that wave. And then a lot more new models arrived, like DoorDash couldn't have happened without both internet as well as mobile, Airbnb, and Uber. All of these things actually emerged, and so there were clear value generation from that. I think what is distinct about this particular platform shift is that it is happening faster than we were all used to, right? What used to take 5 or 8 years is taking 2 or 3 years. And it feels like every day you wake up and you're scanning for the 10 new advancements this technology has created. And so you're trying to catch up. The other thing that has also different this time around is that everybody's got a megaphone, right? Again, you get up in the morning and there's 20 different threads on LinkedIn or X or YouTube podcasts that you have to catch up with. And everyone has got a megaphone, which means that it's particularly noisy. And for leaders like us that are navigating a whole platform shift, this has been much harder because of the pace at which things are moving and how noisy it is to navigate. And so it's even more important for us to be very clear about what our goals are in our business, how we can use this new technology in a productive way, and how to lead our organizations through a pretty massive platform shift. That's how I think about it.
That's a great start. And to your point, it's a common pattern throughout history that we've seen. And I was talking to a few folks at the breakfast earlier today, and to your point about the internet shift, it was disruptive, but it had a longer period of time. So with consolidating the time period, but also the signals and the noise that you're having to manage and navigate that didn't exist before. It's challenging.
It is so challenging. It is so challenging. We have to give ourselves a little hug because we're navigating really, really critical times and at a pace that we're not used to.
Well, let's go to the next topic. So when you look at like the AI stack, everyone's trying to figure out who are the winners and the losers and where there's opportunity to be had. And we talk about the frontier models. We look at what's going on in Anthropic right now. We talk about OpenAI, but let's just talk about Anthropic. I mean, they are growing at a pace that no one's ever seen before from a technology perspective.
Yeah.
They already hit their annual target in March. So $30 billion in revenue with a B. I think they did $5 billion in February alone. So it's just been extraordinary growth.
Yeah.
And so I think if you look at any news channel, any podcast that you listen to, you're probably hearing this narrative that the SaaS apocalypse, if you will.
Yes.
The software.
You're going there.
Let's go there. I think anybody's following the stock market, we know what's going on in the application layer, which is where HubSpot sits. So I guess the question for you more pointedly is, how does HubSpot interact, or applications more broadly? How do you interact with agents? What's the relationship with these frontier models? Can they be complementary, competitive? What is it?
Oh, absolutely. My perspective from the very beginning has been that this is complementary. And again, like the pattern that happens is that when a new technology comes in, people are not clear about who's going to win and who's not going to win. And you take Anthropic. Dario was at our inbound conference last fall. You were there. And it is just pretty incredible to see how they've gone from 100 million in 2024 to then a billion and then 10 billion, and then they're on pace. They've already crossed like 30 billion. So it's just incredible to see. But it's also very clear that they are a platform. And they're a platform that's kind of like enabling a lot of other technologies to be built on top of the platform. They are the new gatekeepers. When I say they, as in like LLMs are the new gatekeepers of this platform shift, just like search companies were, and they provided a whole new place for us to like interact. I do think that there is a whole game, which is the AI operating system, and they are now the gatekeepers of it. And so, you talk about SaaS apocalypse every day. I get the same question: are you gonna like get wiped out by vibe coding? Of course, coding has become easier, but it's not just about coding. You're all leaders, you're all technology leaders, and you know this. It's not like just white coding. Who's going to maintain it? How are you going to integrate it? How do you make sure that your teams are actually adopting that technology? Just because coding got easier, the rest of change management and driving something and maintaining it and scaling it for thousands of users didn't get easier. So I would break it down into maybe, I'll use this, which is the question that we're going through as an industry is, who is going to drive incremental value? Is it LLMs? Is it the new startup that is just cropped up and they're moving at a pace that we've never seen before? Or, for the first time, HubSpot is being an incumbent. Like for the last entire cycle, we were like the disruptors, and we're still as a company getting used to being called the incumbent, but we are in this whole new pattern. And what is the value that is getting delivered, and who has got the real moat? Is it the data? Is it the context? Is it just the foundational models capabilities that are kind of continuing to improve? And so there are lots of questions. To me, it goes back to what you just said, which is I do think LLMs and application software are complementary, because LLMs can provide insights, but the context of what you need to provide insight actually lives within an application. And this, LLMs can write an email and, of course, send an email out. But if you provide the growth context of the last 1,000 conversations, which email has actually driven more of an open rate? How does that email reflect your company, your value proposition, your brand voice, and how you compete against your own competitors? If it can reflect that, then that email with more context is actually going to drive better outcomes. And so you do need this new technology that can deliver insights, but you also need the context of what your application can provide across your business that then drives outcomes. And so We are at the stage where a lot is getting figured out. This is, again, the pattern, of every new technology cycle. It's very, very volatile. It's very choppy because no one knows where the value is. But from a HubSpot's perspective, we are clear. We're not doing this just for the technology's sake. We're doing this to drive outcomes for customers and prospects like you. And the way to do it is to really understand your business context so that we can help you grow.
Sounds like the way that I appreciate you answering that question, because that's not always a fun question to answer.
Yeah.
But your perception is this is more of an opportunity than is a threat as you look at what's going on right now from an AI perspective.
Look, it's a huge opportunity in the sense that if you fundamentally break down the last couple of decades of software we provided helped humans within all our teams get more work done. And there was a common place that you would go to, your teams would click and point and be able to then direct the work that they have to do in order to drive growth. What is fundamentally shifting with AI is that AI is now our teammate. An agent can actually work as much as someone in a team can work. And that means all of that context needs to be there for that particular agent. And if not, that agent is not going to be successful.
Yep.
You wouldn't hire an employee and basically say, go, grow my brand without talking about onboarding that employee and actually having the employee understand what your product is, what your brand stands for, and how you want to compete and how you want to communicate. You wouldn't do that, right? When you hire someone, you're not just going to be like, yeah, here's a quota and go hit your number. You're going to train them, you're going to provide them the context, and you're going to help them understand what your company does. That's exactly what we need to do with AI before we drive AI use cases and before we have agents actually start autonomous work or even human in the loop work. For both of those, you got to provide a lot of the context, and that's the stage that we're in.
The context is key. I think to your point, what you can do with AI is, I think we all understand the power of it, but it can be a power for good, or it can actually hurt your brand. So the idea you can either win faster or lose harder as a result of AI. And so learning how to use that with the context that you just described is really important.
Yeah.
Let's transition a little bit to HubSpot. And so, we talked about we're 3.5 years into this AI journey. To your credit, I think HubSpot has been on the frontier of how do we think about AI, embedding it inside of our platform, not thinking about it isolated into one product.
Yep.
So let's talk about that journey. What does that look like for HubSpot? And then what are the priorities for HubSpot going for the rest of this year?
Yeah, Brendan, I'll tell you, it's just been wild. November 2022, ChatGPT, was the big moment. And I think all of us were fascinated as consumers of the technology. Interestingly, we came into 2023, we just finished our annual plan. And we just figured out what the roadmap needed to look like and what the plans were for 2023. And in January, we basically said we just have to completely pivot. And I think the question for us was, is this an incremental technology, or is this a leapfrog of capability that technology can do? And the problems are exactly the same, but I think for us that moment was we can now do things that we were never able to do before. I mean, you and I have been in sales, and when we started our careers, we were given X number of accounts. We could only cover maybe 10%, 20%, 30% of those accounts. We've not been able to cover all of the accounts that we've been given. And we're not able to follow up with our customers the way we want to. But here's a new technology that is now capable of doing that. So I think for us, it was very clear that this was not incremental. It was a big platform shift. And so we pivoted, and the first set of AI capabilities that we launched were in March of 2023. And I'll tell you, we got a lot wrong, right? And the first set of things that we did was all conversational, because ChatGPT was conversational. We're like, okay, everything is going to be conversational immediately. And then our first set of features that we launched were all conversational. But then, once you roll it out to customers, they're like, well, I don't know what to ask. I'm not exactly sure what to ask. And if it gives me a response, I'm not exactly sure if that is going to help me grow. And so I think since then, we've really refined what it takes to leverage AI within companies. So it really up levels the company level productivity. And I'll kind of like walk through this particular slide, which basically says, if we were a customer relationship management platform, we had a basic job to do before, which was manage your company contact, customer information, deals, tickets. Like we were, very much a structured database. The change that AI actually led us to is to capture all of the unstructured information that happens. 80% of the information within go-to-market teams is conversations that we have with customers. Conversations as a prospect, conversations as a customer, support conversations, pre-sales conversations. So 80% of the information was all of this unstructured conversation. And before, even if we could capture it, we couldn't do much with it. But AI gave a completely different way to now capture all of this information. And that's exactly where we started. And the core of what we've built is really to drive much more context. Our real kind of like point of view is that there's a lot of AI, I would call it slop, or just AI output, for the sake of output. And what we care about is driving outcomes. And in order to drive growth outcomes, you have to know every customer in a much more deeper manner, what their business is. And we should be able to go to your website and pull information about you so that we can tell you what kinds of prompts you should be writing. We should be able to look at your conversations, the 80% of conversations that's happening outside of your application and what you're tracking, and be able to say, here's what works for your customers. And that's the job that we now need to do. And so that's really what we have expanded to. And then obviously, when you try to manage all of the agents, what is changing at the interaction layer is that, of course, we will continue to go into applications, use these applications, but we now have agents. And those agents can do work on your team's behalf. It can write content for your marketer. It can actually set up a meeting for your sales team. It can resolve a support ticket. And in order to do that, we have to make sure that we're delivering both hubs, applications where your teams can use it, as well as agents that can get work done for your teams. And that's the journey that we've been on. And this week was Spring Spotlight, which is a pretty big set of launches for us. We do product launches twice a year, one before Unbound, that's coming up later this year, and one this week. And for us, it's driving and improving the quality of what we deliver to customers.
Well, it's pretty extraordinary when you see the amount of enhancements that HubSpot's made to your platform. You think about even if I take a step back, the product evolution, you go from a marketing automation tool to a CRM platform, and now what you're able to do from an agent perspective is amazing. And since we're all friends in this room, I remember I was with Yamini about 3 years ago at Inbound, and we were just talking about the state of the market. She's like, I'm going to be a pain in the ass with my team about AI. We've got to figure this out, and this is what I'm going to build this product on. And so to give you flowers, it's been pretty amazing to see what you've done in the last.
Yeah, thank you. And we're just getting started. I think for us, it is about driving outcomes. And it's not just about technology for the sake of technology. It's driving outcomes for growth. And so, we're also changing our pricing. This week we announced that we have a customer agent, and that customer agent resolves support tickets. And we'll only charge credits if it resolves a support ticket, not if it's having a conversation for you, or not if it's just handling some call volume. It's actually, we want to be able to tie ourselves to the outcomes that we deliver for customers.
I think it's a great segue to, you talked earlier about AI slop, the concept that the over-promising, under-delivering, the next AI tool is going to solve all your problems, and output, outcome, and looking at, maybe from a HubSpot perspective or even more broadly, where are you seeing adoption? Where are you seeing success?
Yeah.
And then maybe for some of the go-to-market leaders here who are like, hey, I haven't even touched AI. I'm interested.
Yeah.
Where do I begin?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I was having some really great conversations at breakfast with many of you here. I think like if you're a go-to-market leader, you have to think about AI as new ways of solving old problems, right? That's the way that I would be thinking about it. Like now that there is a new technology, I mean, your goals are still the same. You wake up in the morning thinking about growth. How many of you are thinking about a technology? You're waking up thinking about how do I grow my edtech business? How do I grow my fintech business? How do I drive, my insurance company to, adopt new things so that we can get much more productivity? That's what you're thinking about. And if you are, in the growth business, start with things that were not possible before. And I'll give you like maybe 2 examples. The first, we were talking about this example of, all of us in sales, we've been, in the place where if you have 100 accounts, you would have to like manually research those accounts. And I remember my first job in sales, I would read 10Ks. I would read 10 Qs. I would read like any executive within that company talking about the company initiatives, like create notes and track those notes in a Word document and then set up a call.
Yeah.
You can now do that, right? The place to start is how do you leverage this technology to say, if you have 1,000 new customers that you want to reach out to, you can get information about that company immediately. You can enrich the data. You can understand who are the right people within that company that your salespeople have to talk to, and you can get intent signals. And what I mean by intent signals is, is there a new initiative that they announced? Is there someone visiting your pricing page? Is someone asking in a community like Reddit what is happening in a particular space? So you can get all of these intent signals and enrich it so that you are reaching out to that prospect at the time where their intent is really high. That's the place that I would start because it's kind of solving old problems with a new technology. Then the second thing that I would do as a growth leader, and we all know this, is like, you have 5 calls in a day. And you have the best intentions of capturing the notes and taking all of those notes and sending it to maybe your customer success manager or someone else within the team and sending a response in an email, but you never get around to it because, your day is already maxed out. That has been the sales problem. You can now solve it, pretty easily. You can have like a note taker join the conversation. It's captured all of the conversation that is happening. At the end of the call, as soon as you're done with the call, it says, here are the 4 highlights, here are the action items, and here's an email that you can send to the customer or the prospect as a follow-up. Do you want to change it? Of course, you have the ability to change it, and then when you send it, like you've now made it, much, much easier for salespeople to do their jobs. And so I'd start with 2 or 3 of these new capabilities that was just not possible before. But then I wouldn't stop there. I think what we're finding with AI in general is that people are getting individual AI productivity. How many of you here are using LLM every single day? Yeah, all of us. I mean, my emails have gotten faster. What I write has gotten faster. But how many of you have seen all of that translate into the entire company becoming 10x productive? There you go. I want to come and talk to you.
Yeah.
I really want to.
You should come up on stage.
Yes, you should please come. Because that's the gap. The gap is individual AI productivity to institutional AI productivity. And the gap has to become, where we all as leaders focus. Because, of course, the technology is capable of doing a lot of things. But what can we as leaders do? First of all, pick 1 or 2 areas that are aligned with your company's growth or your company's initiative. Don't try to do too many things. Just like pick, 1 or 2 things. And then take that entire workflow, reimagine what that workflow needs to look like, and get everybody within your team or your company on it. If you do, then individual AI productivity will translate into team-wide productivity or company-wide productivity, right? And so I'll give you an example. One of the first areas that HubSpot, chose is support, right? Support use case is known. There's like product market fit. So we used our knowledge base We used our ability to kind of, have a history of all the support tickets, and we started resolving support tickets using AI. And, if someone comes and a chatbot can answer a lot of the questions, it's answering 60% of the questions, which means that, we've increased the productivity of the team. We've taken the same, support reps, but they're now solving more complex, questions of customers. They're spending more time on really critical issues instead of like repetitive tasks, right? Oh, how do I turn on this integration? How do I make sure, my team gets access to this? Those kinds of questions we're able to handle. So I think like the big jump for us is to go from individual AI productivity into institutional productivity, and that is going to take intentional choices as leaders on the biggest problems that we want to solve within our teams.
Yeah. So it sounds like there's you used a roadmap before, but it sounds like find those things that are standard repetitive tasks that you can look to leverage AI from an automation productivity perspective. You talked a little bit about signals, you talked about transcripts. I'd be remiss if I didn't say we have two sponsors here that talk about that stuff. So,
right.
So Gong on the transcript side, if you haven't seen them, you should definitely talk to them because it integrates very tightly within HubSpot. And then from a signal perspective, if you think about Clay, how do you connect these two great platforms inside of HubSpot to orchestrate the demand side of it?
Yeah.
It's a really powerful way to be thinking about it from a go-to-market leader perspective. And then as you were just talking a little bit about how do we think about becoming AI-first teams, where do we get these pilot programs with some of these quick wins that we can then institutionalize across the organization?
Yeah. I think that is really the focus. And, I think we didn't talk about marketing. And marketing is like changing pretty dramatically. 2 years ago, we said, the way in which our customers were searching for information, clicking on blue links, coming to our website, that's just going to completely change, and it is. In fact, we've been surprised by how quickly it has changed. The latest is that 70% of Google searches right now end with 0 clicks. So that whole way in which people were getting to know your brand and your company, that is just very quickly going away. And now it's all about diversified channels that you and your brand can be present in. And of course, that also means how do you show up in LLMs? And that is a huge shift that is happening within the marketing space. And almost every growth marketer, everybody who's thinking about marketing is rethinking which channels should I now focus on? How do I make sure that I'm making up for the lost kind of like top of funnel volume by driving better conversions in other channels? And how do I end up showing up in the answers that your customers are asking in LLMs? And that's a big shift within marketing as well.
Yeah, I think it's a good, maybe we'll park there for just a second. Because we talked, I think when Yamini asked how many you're using your LLM on a daily basis, I think it was 98%.
Yeah.
That's true. So the idea of like the blue link Google now moving into LLMs. HubSpot's done a lot from an AEO perspective. You talked about the Spring Spotlight. Is there anything you want to share with this team on where you're thinking AEO is going and how HubSpot's solving for that?
I mean, look, you all use LLMs every single day, and your customers are also using LLMs every single day. What is interesting is that they're asking much deeper questions, right? The average number of words within a Google search was 5 words. The average number of words within a question that they're asking in LLM is 25. It's a deeper question. It's a much more intentional question. It's deep in the discovery cycle, and it's a very, very specific question. So, we, for the last decade as marketers, we've been like focused on how do you rank this keyword? How do you show up in the search results? How can you be in the top of the list of the blue links that we provided? Now we have to rethink what are the prompts that our customers are asking? How deep are those prompts? And how can we make sure that our content, not just in our blog, but also in social, but also in community, in places like Reddit, how does that content show up so that there is a citation for our brand or our product within LLMs? And that is the big shift that is happening. And in order to do that, as companies, we have to start thinking about, do we understand how we show up in LLMs? And how do we show up relative to our competitors? We call it the share of voice, right? What is our share of voice compared to our competitors when you look at an LLM? And then what are the kinds of prompts that our customers and prospects are now using. It's not keywords anymore. And do we understand the top 10 to 25 prompts that our customers are asking of these LLMs? And then what should our content strategy be? Blogs are still important because where does AI and LLMs get information from looking at all of this content, but also your social content is important, your content in communities is important. And so how do you make the changes within your content so that it shows up? I think by the time we get to the next couple of years, the traffic composition is going to change pretty significantly, that AEO and how you show up in the answers are going to be really important. And that is exactly what our focus is. I mean, if you can imagine, we at HubSpot, in the heights of SEO, we had like 50 million visitors coming to our website every month. We're like a media company, right? We're having all of these visitors, and how did they come to our website? You'd search for product marketing or sales or some content, and we would have that piece of content, and we would get people to the website. I mean, in 2024, we started seeing this decline very dramatically, and we've been talking about it since 2024. At the same time, we've seen leads from social, from YouTube, from newsletters, from podcasts, from LinkedIn. All of those channels actually step up. And then 2024 and 2025, we started experimenting with AEO. We were at that point working with a company called XFunnel, and XFunnel did AI visibility and share of voice as well as recommendations. We ended up acquiring the company because we saw such great results. We saw really good results with this company. So we said, let's just bring it in for our customers. And we completely built that product into HubSpot. And if you look at our results, last year, the leads from AEO grew 1,800%, right? Everything else is declining and AEO is growing. Now, I will say that the base that we're starting off from AEO is small, so you will see the percentage that these leads are growing is very high. But what was interesting for us is that the leads from LLMs were converting 3x better, not 3% better, 3x better. And we've not seen that type of conversion from any channel. Most of other channels, we would do a lot of optimization to get 2% to 5% improvement. This is 3x better. Yep. And then if we look at why it's converting, it's because our customers that are looking for a specific solution, they're deep in their research, they're deep in the discovery process, they're asking very specific questions. And if we show up, then the intent to buy and intent to convert is much higher. And so we've now taken all of those lessons. We've built the product into HubSpot. This week at Spring Spotlight, we announced HubSpot's AEO product. And you can use it standalone to track the visibility, but it's also available within Marketing Hub and Content Hub.
Yeah, I remember when you showed that slide at Inbound last year, and you were showing the distribution of sources between.
That's right.
It was mind blowing.
That's right. Yep.
I think that we have seen it at RP just from a LLM perspective, looking at the lead distribution. And actually, one of the folks that we were talking to this morning, that came through Reddit. This is a Fortune 100 company, multi-billion dollar, and Reddit is a source for that. And so, to your point, making sure you're having content that's addressing the questions, the very specific questions that people are having, is paramount. It doesn't mean SEO is dead. I think that's one of the other narratives we're seeing in the market. Yeah. It's in a lot of ways, LLMs are the aggregator of the content you already have, and making sure that you not only show up in the places where people are searching, but you're curating the content in a way that is actually addressing that specific question.
Yeah, I think there's this, I'm glad you're pointing, SEO, there's a lot of confusion about what is dead, and content is still important. If your brand and your product content is not out there, then you're not going to be able to attract the right kinds of customers into your funnel. But how that content shows up, where it shows up, and how optimized it is for the new world of AI, that's what is changing pretty dramatically. Yeah. Very exciting.
Well, let's change, or let's move more into the human side of the conversation. So we're talking about, hey, technology is exciting, but you ultimately have to have the humans that are orchestrating and using the tech. You talked a little bit about this in terms of starting with a pilot and then getting institutionalized. Maybe let's go a little bit deeper on that AI first, because I think most of the go-to-market leaders here would say, hey, I do want to have an AI first team. So how has HubSpot not only transformed product strategy, but how the team works internally to really adopt it and see success?
I think as leaders, helping our organizations and teams navigate a massive platform shift, this is the hardest thing to crack, right? I think it's pretty, it's okay when I talk to HubSpotters, there's a little bit of anxiety and fear. What is this technology actually going to do? Is it going to especially in the early stages, there was this hype about, $1 billion company with 100 agents and no humans. And it's just a lot of hype. And so, of course, there is fear and anxiety and a lot of resistance in terms of adopting something that we don't quite understand the capabilities for. That is human. So how do we then inspire people to leverage this and become much better as professionals? And so I think if you look at HubSpot's transformation, I talked about it in 2023, we saw a big platform shift. So we started making all the changes in the platform. I will say now in 2026, there is not an aspect of the company that we have not changed. We're changing pricing. We're changing go-to-market, and almost every aspect within go-to-market, from marketing and sales, and having agents as well as assistants within it. But the biggest thing that we are trying to change is the mindset of everybody that is looking at their jobs differently. And what I mean by mindset is that in the previous cycle, whether you're in sales or you're in support or you're in marketing, you had a playbook, right? And I equate that to being like map readers. You had a playbook, you knew what point A was, you knew point B, and then you had how to go from 2% conversion to 4% conversion. I'm going to try these new way, the playbook. And so we were all somewhat map readers. And right now with AI, it's not very clear what the experiments need to look like. And therefore, we talk about it at HubSpot as having an explorer mindset. Set up a hypothesis, set up an experiment, learn from that experiment. And as leaders, we actually celebrate if that experiment failed. Because if an experiment fails, then you just learned something new about why it failed and why you should not try that path again and do something else. And so I think it's actually reducing the fear and anxiety and really celebrating experimentation within the company. Then what we did was we created pods where, within sales, we've had pods of go-to-market engineers work with our best managers, our best reps, and look at what they're doing and also helping them actually leverage the technology even better. And then when a pod becomes super successful, then scale it to larger and larger teams. And so a big part of it is the mindset that you as leaders within go-to-market have to help your teams embrace. How can you reduce the fear and the anxiety and help them really experiment with the new technology and learn, and being right is as good as being wrong. And how do you just then scale that up across the organization? I think that's the biggest transformation that we're going through is the mindset that is required to embrace completely new technology.
I don't like that. I think it was on the Wall Street Journal. It was talking about the only word that people hate more than are on right now is AI.
Yeah.
It's just your point about the fear. It's what does this mean for me? What does this mean for my job? And as you just described, one of our values at RP is fail forward, and exactly kind of how you were just describing it is the way we grow is we stretch and we do things that we aren't comfortable with because that's how we learn.
Yeah.
And the way to kind of block or to take down that wall of distrust is actually to try.
To try it, to embrace it. And, look, I think many of you have been probably there, and I'm going to date myself. I joined the tech industry in '96, right? And it was on-premise. And we went through this on-premise to cloud transformation. And it was the same thing. Back then, the early, headlines of cloud was you're going to have no IT organization. There will be no job called the CIO job. There will be no IT jobs. Guess what happened over the next 10 years? the IT teams became even more important. We actually ended up spending more. Of course, what we did with the technology changed pretty dramatically. It was no longer maintaining your data center and having a cage with all your servers and putting everything there, and you had to use very broad-based SaaS technology, but you had to adapt and you had to actually experiment and move to that new way of doing business. And it's the same thing right now. There's just a lot of fear and anxiety, which is completely natural. So how do we get past that? And how do we really get our teams to focus on driving outcomes and upskilling themselves, learning, experimenting, growing? Because I will say that the best times in the industry that I've learned the most were times of massive change. It feels like a lot going through. I don't wake up any single day feeling like I've caught up with this technology. Every day I feel like, my God, there's so much more to do and so much more to learn. But I think if you look back in your careers, the times that you learn the most and the times that you grow the most, even as leaders, is leading through a big transformation like this, which is what is exciting.
Well, that's a good segue to our last question, which gets into, it's one thing for the teams to adopt it, it's one thing to institutionalize it, but that ultimately requires a leader that's driving that. And you started, I remember when you and I first met, it was a little over 5 years ago, you were the chief customer officer.
Yep.
Move into the CEO role. You've been here for 5 years in the CEO role. I think anyone would probably argue you've seen more change than anyone would have anticipated in those 5 years, with AI, of course, being at the forefront. What's required from a mindset perspective and from a leadership perspective to just impart some wisdom, maybe too strong a word, but as folks here are thinking, I really need to start being AI first, I really want to drive this from a product perspective and just how my team uses it, what would you share?
I first of all say, last 5 years have been just extraordinarily hard. I feel like I'm holding a, roller coaster and hanging on, because there's so much that is changing in just the last 5 years. So I think first of all, give ourselves a little bit of grace for what we are going through as an industry and the pace with which things are changing. I think for me, it is a learning mindset. There's one thing that we say at HubSpot, which is be a learn it all, not a know it all. And it's particularly important at a time like this when there's so much that is changing. And the things that I would say, I don't have broad advice, but the things that I do are I'm hands-on with the technology. I didn't go to our teams to say, hey, you go and use the technology. We do this thing called the weekly wrap. Every week, I spend 10 minutes, I record a loom and I send it to the whole company. We have about 9,000 employees, and this is a way for us to get everybody to understand what is top of mind. When we do those things, I'm just showing what I'm doing. I remember 2 years back, I was using ChatGPT at the time to write earnings scripts as a when you think about earnings, it's I'd put all of the last 5 years of earnings into ChatGPT, and then I had set up a whole thing and I showed that. And then this was at the time that tariffs were new, so I did deep research with ChatGPT, and I showed what the deep research had said. Now I'm building when I share things, I'm building artifacts. Claude actually came up with an artifact, ability to pull an artifact 2 weeks back. So the next week, I actually showed how to create an artifact. So I think it's important for us not to talk, but actually to embrace it, use it, become builders, and show what it is capable of doing. And then also, like I said, part of it is to say, I got this wrong, because we will get this wrong. At the pace that technology is moving, you're going to make some calls that are right and some calls that are wrong. And you have to embrace, experimentation yourself. And you have to be able to say, I got this right and I got this wrong, and be able to communicate that within the team. And so it has to come from us as leaders. And so I'd encourage you, 98% of you are already using LLMs, that's great. Now start, picking 1 or 2 areas within your teams and drive that change and become builders, because this is, one platform shift where builders and doers and learners win more than anybody else. And that's the thing that I would say.
Well, I was gonna summarize that, but I think it actually is really what I was thinking that question for you, and as I've gotten to know you over the last 5 years, the 3 things that always stick out to me is humility, curiosity, and resolve. as you just talked about, the humility to understand you may not know the answer, but the desire and the curiosity,
Yep.
to figure it out, to test, to try, and the resolve to say, this is where we're going, and we're gonna make it work, and we're gonna have bumps along the way, but we're gonna get there.
Well done. Well said. Thank you, Brendan.
That's you. Well, we're running out of time. We had a few. Actually, I don't know if we're gonna get to Q&A if that clock is right. But guys, I just think it's such a treat and privilege to have Yamini with us. So thank you for being here. One thing I do want to make sure everyone's aware of, there are two boards we have here. This is the Sketch Effect. William Warren is the CEO of Sketch Effect.
Awesome.
HubSpot customer. We actually wouldn't exist as a HubSpot partner without William, so he's actually the start of this business. Not start of the business, but start of the HubSpot relationship. But he is doing drawings, you can see, of the session, so hopefully there's some drawings over there. But more importantly, for this point, we want to invite you in this conversation. And so as you're hearing, there's the AI from a technology perspective, there's also the human piece. And so the board in the back, Rasa, who's waving his hand, we would love for you to engage. We want to hear your perspective on what you're seeing that's working and what's not. So Yamini talked a little bit about outputs and outcomes. And so, hey, what are the things that you're doing that you're struggling with, and where are you seeing results? I think it'd be a really fun collaborative opportunity for us to learn from one another, and then we'll share that out after the session. But I think actually Billy was the one. Can you please give Yamini a standing ovation?
Oh, thank you so much, and thank you, Brendan. Thanks a lot. Really appreciate it.
Let's give it up.
See you next time.